When I first looked at my phone, the number of missed calls seemed impossible. There were 28 of them, all from the same people who hadn't wanted to talk to me just a day before. My hand was shaking a little as I watched the monitor next to my hospital bed, which showed my heart rate in a steady, beeping line. The room smelled strongly of disinfectant, a clean, sharp smell that covered everything. I could feel the thin tubes taped to my arm, and a blood pressure cuff automatically squeezed my bicep every so often, a reassuring pressure. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling were almost too bright, and they seemed to blur as my eyes filled with tears, though I was determined not to let them fall. I just kept staring at the phone, at that small, glowing screen. The group chat was still open, showing the last messages, my brother's casual dismissal, my parents' quick excuse about a potluck, and then my own quiet two-word reply. Okay. Now suddenly they were desperate to talk. Now that something had happened and the news had probably traveled beyond our family, I just rolled the phone over on my chest, the screen going dark, and closed my eyes. I was too tired to even think about replying. It had all started 30 hours earlier, in a much more ordinary place. The baggage claim at the Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The air in the terminal had that familiar airport smell, a mix of slightly stale coffee from a nearby cart and the faint chemical tang of jet fuel. I was already exhausted. My journey home had involved 2 long layovers, a patch of bad turbulence that kept everyone in their seats, and the constant, dull discomfort from the phantom limb where my left arm used to be. The harness for my new prosthetic was digging into my shoulder, and the skin under the strap felt rubbed raw. When the conveyor belt finally started moving with a loud rumble, I tried to get into a good position, bracing myself with my right hand. Bags of all shapes and sizes started to appear, tumbling onto the black rubber belt. I saw mine almost immediately. It was an oversized black duffel with a bright yellow tag. David, one of the guys in my unit, had jokingly called it the Bumblebee, but now trying to pull it off the moving belt felt less like a joke and more like a serious challenge. I gritted my teeth, grabbed the handle, and leaned back with all my weight until the heavy bag finally thudded onto the tiled floor next to me. I could feel sweat starting to dampen the collar of my shirt, even though the airport's air conditioning was blasting cold air. I stood there for a minute, catching my breath, and then I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the icon for our family group chat. It was the same chat where we exchanged quick, happy birthday messages, and where my updates from my time in Afghanistan had mostly been met with silence. I typed out a simple message. My flight just landed at 5 p.m. Is anyone able to pick me up? I saw the little dots that meant someone was typing, but then they vanished. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was from my brother, Mark. Busy tonight, Sarah. Just grab an Uber. Another message came in right after, this time from my mom. We have a potluck tonight. You should have planned ahead a bit better. I just stared at the screen, reading the words over and over until they didn't make sense anymore. For months, I had imagined this moment. In my head, I'd pictured them waiting for me, maybe a hug right there in the arrivals hall, or my dad awkwardly holding a welcome home sign. I had definitely not pictured this, being told to use a rideshare app because my homecoming was an inconvenience. I typed back 2 words. Okay. And just like that, I felt something inside me just fold. I didn't get angry, and I didn't try to argue. I just made myself smaller, something I had been practicing my whole life. The line for the Uber pickup outside was long, a winding queue of other travelers dragging their suitcases behind them. The sun was setting, and the low golden light reflected off the glass walls of the terminal, making me blink. I felt a little unsteady on my feet, my legs wobbly after being cramped in a plane seat for so long. The driver who finally pulled up was a middle-aged man who looked tired but had kind eyes. He saw me struggling with the bag and got out to lift it into the trunk, not saying a word about my missing arm, which I was grateful for. I got into the back seat, rested my forehead against the cool glass of the window, and just closed my eyes. The ride was quiet. I felt every single bump in the road, each one seeming to rattle my bones. My prosthetic was aching where it connected to my shoulder, and I kept trying to adjust it without much success. By the time we turned onto my street, it was almost dark. The neighborhood was quiet, with porch lights glowing on most of the houses. I could see families inside, moving around in their living rooms, and I could smell the faint scent of charcoal and grilled meat in the air. Potlucks, just like my mom had said. I wondered if one of them was hers. My own house was dark and cold. I had asked my parents to turn on the heat before I got home, but I could tell as soon as I walked in that they had forgotten. There was a pile of mail spilling out of the basket by the door, envelopes I'd asked my brother to sort through. The refrigerator was humming, but when I opened it, it was empty except for a few old jars of condiments that were long past their expiration dates. I was too tired to even take off my coat. I just dropped my bag by the door and fell onto the couch. The silence in the house felt heavy, almost suffocating. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead, and I finally let them close. I don't know how much time passed. I woke up to the sound of my own breathing, which sounded harsh and raspy in the total darkness. My chest felt incredibly tight, and my vision was blurry. Tried to sit up, but the whole room seemed to spin, and I fell back onto the couch cushions. That's when I heard a faint beeping sound. It started quietly, then got louder. I turned my head and saw a small red light flashing from the carbon monoxide detector across the room. My phone was on the coffee table just a few feet away. I reached out for it with my right hand, my fingers stretching, but it was just too far. I couldn't make my arm obey. The last thing I remember thinking was how strange it was. At least I told them it was okay. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was the harsh glare of fluorescent lights on the ceiling. A nurse was standing over me, taping the IV line in my arm. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, and it was strangely comforting. My throat felt dry and sore, and my head was pounding, but my eyes went straight to the phone they had placed on the rolling table next to the bed. The screen was dark, but when I touched it, it lit up. 28 missed calls, from Mark, from my mom, from my dad, all of them in the last few hours after I'd already collapsed. I just stared at the screen for a long moment, then let it go dark again. I turned my head and looked away. For once, I wasn't going to answer. Long before I ever went to Afghanistan, before I had a prosthetic that chafed my skin, before any of this, there were all the small, quiet moments that taught me what my place in the family was. I grew up in a normal-looking house on the west side of Seattle, with green shutters that needed a fresh coat of paint and a big oak tree in the front yard. Inside, though, it felt like everything revolved around my brother, Mark. He was 3 years older than me, the star quarterback of his high school football team. He had an easy smile and a kind of confidence that made my parents treat him like he was the center of the universe. I was the other one, the quiet one, the one who got good grades. I played the flute in the school band and spent most of my time reading books. My parents always said, "Sarah is so easy, she never needs anything." They said it like it was a compliment, but I always understood what it really meant. It was an excuse to not pay attention. I have this one memory that I can't shake. I was 8 years old, and I was climbing that big oak tree in the front yard. A branch I was holding onto suddenly snapped, and I fell. I hit the ground hard, and I knew right away that something was wrong. My arm was bent at a strange angle, and a sharp, white-hot pain shot all the way up to my shoulder. My parents were great at first. They rushed me to the emergency room, and my mom held my good hand while we waited. But after the x-rays came back and the doctor confirmed my arm was broken, they got a call. It was Mark's coach. His big championship game was that night. "He just can't miss this," my mother explained, brushing the hair out of my face. "The whole team is depending on him." So they drove me to a neighbor's house, dropped me off, and went to the game. I told myself it was fine. I was fine. Even back then, I was learning to use that word as a shield. By the time I was in high school, the pattern was set. Mark got new football cleats every season and went to expensive summer training camps. I got a part-time job at the local library to pay for my own clothes and any extras I wanted. The night I won a big statewide writing award, my parents came, but they sat in the back. They clapped when my name was called, but they left during the reception. Mark had an early practice the next morning. I remember folding the certificate and putting it in my bag, my face feeling hot. I didn't understand why I kept expecting them to be proud of me. College was the first time I felt like I could breathe. I earned a full scholarship, which was my ticket out. The first thing my father asked when I told him wasn't congratulations. It was, "This won't cost us anything, right? Mark's summer program is pretty expensive." I just smiled and shook my head. No problem. I was used to it. But I still had this little bit of hope that if I did something big enough, something important, maybe they would finally see me. When the military recruiters came to campus, I felt something click. They talked about service, about honor, about being part of something bigger than yourself. And a small, quiet part of me thought, maybe they'll finally be proud of me for this. Basic training was the hardest thing I'd ever done. We ran until I thought my lungs would burst and did push-ups until my arms gave out. But it was also the first time I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. The other recruits didn't care about my brother's football stats or my parents. They just cared if I could do my part, if I had their back. Out there, covered in sweat and dirt, I felt like I was worth something in a way I never had at home. Deployment to Afghanistan happened quickly. It was a world of dust and heat. The sand got into everything. The mountains there looked ancient and dangerous. We ate meals out of packets, told bad jokes to pass the time, and counted the days until we could go home. The mail from my family was rare. When I did get a letter, Mark's notes were short. Hope it's going okay. The team is doing great. My parents' letters were even shorter. Stay safe. Love, Mom and Dad, said he. I held on to those scraps of paper anyway. I taped one note from my mother above my bunk. It just said, "Proud of you." For a long time, I let myself believe it. But I knew in the back of my mind that it was an easy thing to write. They were proud when it was convenient, when it didn't ask anything of them. The hard parts, the messy parts, those were always mine to handle by myself. I didn't join the military to get back at them. But maybe I did want to prove something. That I was strong, that I was valuable, that I was worth noticing. Carried that hope with me through everything. And then, one day, an explosion took that hope, and my left arm away. It wasn't like in the movies, it was just a deafening sound, and then dust, and then silence. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, and then I passed out. When I woke up in a field hospital, my arm was gone below the elbow. I just stared at the bandages and thought about that oak tree. My body was broken again, and my parents were nowhere to be found. The letters that came after that were short. "We're so glad you're alive. Get well soon." Mark sent a text with a picture of his new car. I told myself it didn't matter. I was fine. But a question kept echoing in my head. If this isn't enough to make them show up, what is? So I focused on coming home. I pictured getting off that plane and seeing them waiting for me. I imagined them hugging me, telling me they were proud. That was the image I held on to while they wheeled me onto the transport plane, while I was learning to button a shirt with one hand, and while I was being fitted for a prosthetic that rubbed my skin raw. And then the moment finally came. I was at the airport, and all I got were excuses: a potluck, a busy schedule, and Uber. I typed, "Okay," the word I had been training to say my whole life. The terminal at SeaTac was buzzing with noise. Voices all blended together into a dull roar with announcements cutting through every few minutes. I stood by the sliding glass doors, holding my suitcase handle tightly in my right hand, trying to keep my legs from shaking. 30 hours of travel was a lot, and my whole body felt like it was about to shut down. The prosthetic was itching, and the sore on my shoulder was throbbing with every small movement. My mouth was completely dry. I had drunk all the little cups of water they gave me on the plane, but it didn't help the deep thirst that came from being so tired and in pain. All around me, people were having happy reunions. Little kids were running into their grandparents' arms. Couples were hugging and kissing right there by the baggage carousels. And then there was me, standing alone. My phone pinged to let me know my Uber was 5 minutes away. I looked at the driver's name, Paul, and the car, a gray Honda Civic. The letters on the screen were a little blurry. I tried to focus on the crowd instead, on the smell of cinnamon buns from a nearby Cinnabon and the squeak of sneakers on the polished floor. When Paul pulled up, he just gave me a small nod. I tried to smile back, but it felt stiff. He got out and lifted my heavy bag into the trunk without a word, his arms moving easily in a way that made me miss my own. I got into the back seat, and the leather felt cool against my jacket. The ride was quiet, which I was thankful for. I just stared out the window as the sun went down. Seattle looked the same, but also different. The bridges were lit up, and the headlights of the cars looked like flowing ribbons of light. The air outside was crisp. It should have felt good to be home. Instead, every block we passed just reminded me that I was coming home to an empty house. When Paul stopped in front of my house, I thanked him and fumbled with my wallet to get out some cash for a tip. He just waved his hand. "Don't worry about it. Take care of yourself," he said, not really looking at me. Those words felt heavier than he probably intended. The house was dark. The porch light was off and the curtains were drawn. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like a place that had been closed up for too long. I set my suitcase down by the door, and the sound of its wheels on the hardwood floor was startlingly loud. My shoulders ached from the weight of everything. Out of habit, I opened the refrigerator. The light flickered on, showing empty shelves except for a jar of mustard with a crusty cap, a jar of pickles, and a carton of milk that had expired 2 weeks ago. I shut the door quickly. The house was cold, and I realized I was still wearing my coat. I pulled out my phone and looked at the group chat one more time. Nothing new since I had typed "okay." The blank screen felt like it was mocking me. I dropped onto the couch and the cushions sank down around me. I only meant to close my eyes for a minute. Just 1 minute. When I opened them again, the room was pitch black. My head was throbbing. My vision was blurry, and the air felt thick, like I was trying to breathe through a wet cloth. I tried to sit up, but the room started to spin and I fell back. My stomach churned. That's when I heard it, the faint, steady beep. I thought it was my head at first. Then I saw the little red light flashing on the carbon monoxide detector across the room. A jolt of panic went through me. My phone was on the coffee table. I reached for it, my fingers just brushing the air. My body wouldn't do what I wanted it to. I fell back onto the couch, my chest heaving. The last thing I saw was my phone lighting up as if a new message had come in. I thought of the word I'd typed at the airport. "Okay." I almost laughed. Then the darkness covered everything. When I woke up, I was under those bright fluorescent lights again, smelling that clean, sharp smell. Voices around me sounded far away. "Just relax. You're in the hospital," a nurse said. Her voice was calm. I blinked, trying to focus. My eyes found my phone on the tray table. The screen lit up. 28 missed calls. Mark, Mom, Dad, all of them. I didn't pick it up. I just let the screen go dark and turned my head to stare at the patterned tiles on the ceiling. They wanted to talk to me now, but when I was at the airport, on the curb, or in my cold, empty house, all I had gotten was, "Grab an Uber." Lying in that hospital bed, listening to the machines, my mind kept going back. The missed calls on my phone seemed like a bad joke. Why were they so worried now? The answer was simple. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about how this would make them look. I thought about the oak tree again. 8 years old, a broken arm, and left with a neighbor so Mark could play in a game. The neighbor was nice, but she gave me a soda and helped me prop my arm up on a pillow, but the feeling of being left behind hurt more than the broken bone. I remember the doctor asking, "Are your parents coming back soon?" And I just smiled and said, "They'll be here after the game." That wasn't the only time. My high school graduation. I had worked so hard to be valedictorian, I spent weeks on my speech. My parents showed up, but they stood in the back and I saw my dad check his watch twice. As soon as I had my diploma, they hurried me out. They had to drive Mark to a summer tournament. There was no celebration dinner, no pictures, just a quick, "good job," as they got in the car. When I got my college scholarship, I thought that would be different. But my dad just asked if it would cost them anything. Mark was going to a private university, and that was expensive. I worked my way through college, serving food in the dining hall and cleaning classrooms, while they sent Mark care packages. I got an envelope with a $20 bill and a sticky note that said, "Make it last." Then there was my wedding day. I thought, this is it. They'll show up for this. I wore a simple dress. I just wanted them to be there and be happy for me. But my mom spent most of the reception worrying about Mark's new girlfriend, who wore a white dress to my wedding, and my dad complained about how much the food cost. Mark showed up late. When my husband, David, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Just look at me," I tried. But it still hurt. Every important moment of my life, I was second place. I was the one who could handle it, the one who would say, "It's fine, son," because asking for more was pointless. The military was my way out. The day I shipped off, I thought maybe they'd make a small effort. But my mom was busy packing a cooler for Mark's road trip, and my dad was checking the tire pressure on his car. Mark just gave me a lazy salute and said, "Don't get yourself killed." I got on the plane with my duffel bag and a huge empty feeling in my chest. In Afghanistan, I found the family I'd always wanted, my squad. We looked out for each other. They were the ones I trusted. But when the IED went off and I woke up without my arm, the first people I called were my family. I just wanted to hear their voices. My mom answered. "We're glad you're alive," she said, her voice flat. "But you really should have thought about the insurance." My dad asked if the army would still be paying me, and Mark texted me later. "That really sucks. Hey, guess what? I got a new car." Even then, I typed back, "It's fine." Now, looking at the hospital ceiling, I realized how automatic that response was. Saying I was fine was a habit. It was easier than trying to explain the constant disappointment. I had been trained to fight, to survive explosions, and to rebuild my life. But the deepest injuries weren't from Afghanistan. They were from home. Those 28 missed calls weren't for me. They were for the story that was about to come out, and they were right to be scared. The first reporter I spoke to found me by chance. His name was Ben Carter, and he was a local journalist working on a story about veterans' health care. He was at the hospital shadowing a paramedic for a different story, but he overheard him in the break room. "She texted her family for a ride home from the airport," the paramedic said. "You know what they told her? Grab an Uber. Then she collapses from a CO leak, alone." Ben's interest was piqued. He found my room later that day. "Ma'am," he started, his voice respectful, "I heard a little about what happened. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about it." My first instinct was to say no, to protect them like I always had. But then I thought about those missed calls and the years of being second best, and for the first time I wanted someone to hear the truth. So I told him. I didn't yell or cry, I just gave him the facts. The 30 hours of travel, the pain from the prosthetic, the weight of the bag. I told him exactly what the texts said. "Busy, just grab an Uber. We have a potluck." Ben's eyes got wide and he wrote everything down. The story ran on the 10 o'clock news. Local veteran returns home to empty house, is abandoned at airport by family. My name was used. They showed blurry footage of me being wheeled down a hospital hallway. The anchor's voice was full of shock. After losing her arm in service to her country, she returned to Seattle only to be told by her family to grab an Uber. Hours later, she was found unresponsive in her home. Then they cut to the paramedic. Her phone was still open to the group chat when we found her. It was heartbreaking. By the next morning, it was everywhere. People were sharing the story, and hashtags were trending. My phone, which had been silent for so long, was now blowing up with messages from complete strangers, other veterans, people who understood, and just regular people offering to bring me food, offering me a place to stay. My family, meanwhile, went into damage control mode. Mark left me 7 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. "You made us look like monsters, Sarah. It was a misunderstanding." My mom sent a long string of texts. "The potluck was a commitment. We couldn't just cancel. We thought you'd want your independence." My dad left one short message. "This has all gone too far. Call us so we can figure out how to fix this." Fix this? That was all that mattered to them. But the story was out. A local plumbing company called the hospital and offered to fix the faulty furnace that had caused the CO leak for free. A hotel chain offered me a free room to stay in until my house was safe. One morning, a huge bouquet of flowers arrived. The card just said, "From a neighbor you've never met. Welcome home." I stared at them, my throat tight. It was more kindness than I had received from my own family in my entire life. The nurses would stop by my room just to check on me, one of them whispering, "They don't deserve you." The missed calls kept coming. 28 became 32, then 35, but I didn't answer. I wasn't going to make excuses for them this time. The story wasn't just mine anymore. They finally showed up 2 days later. They didn't sneak in, they marched in, my mother leading the way, holding a cheap-looking bouquet of flowers from a grocery store. "Sweetheart, we came as soon as we heard," she said, her voice loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. Mark followed her, looking furious. I could see him checking his phone, probably reading the comments online. My dad just stood by the door, his hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. The silence in the room was only broken by the beeping of the monitor. Mark spoke first. "This is all getting blown way out of proportion." I just looked at him. My voice was quiet. "Is it?" "You didn't tell them the whole story," he snapped. "You made it sound like we just abandoned you." "Because you did," I said. My mother gasped. "That is not fair. We had plans. You can't just expect us to drop everything." "Families are supposed to drop everything," I said. "But I guess ours doesn't work that way." A nurse, Laura, the one who had been so kind, came in. She quietly checked my IV, her presence a silent support. "Do you want me to list the times?" I asked them. "Because I can. When I broke my arm, you left me with a neighbor to take Mark to a game. When I won the writing award, you left early for his practice. At my graduation, Dad, you asked if my scholarship would cost you money. At my wedding, Mom, you were more worried about Mark's girlfriend than me. And when I lost my arm, I held up my bandaged stump. You asked if the army would still pay me." "That's ancient history," Mark muttered, his jaw tight. "It matters to me," I said, my voice steady. "And it mattered when you told me to get an Uber. It mattered when you chose a potluck over me. You keep saying it was a misunderstanding, but I understand perfectly. This is who you are." My dad finally spoke. "We didn't know it was serious, Sarah." "Did you ask?" I replied. He didn't have an answer. Laura, the nurse, touched my chart. "Sarah, you decide where you go from here. It's your choice." My mom bristled. "She's our daughter. We'll be taking her home." "I'm not going home with you," I said. The words hung in the air. My mom's face went pale. Mark swore. "The people in this community, strangers, have done more for me in 3 days than you have in my entire life. They see me. You never have." My mother slammed the flowers down on the table. "You are humiliating us." "No, Mom," I said, shaking my head. "You did that all by yourselves." They stormed out. Mark first, then my mother. My dad hesitated at the door, looked at me for a long second, and then he turned and followed them. The door clicked shut, leaving me in the quiet with just the steady beep of the monitor. When I was discharged, it wasn't my family who picked me up. It was my neighbor, Miss Evans, from across the street. She knocked on my hospital door holding a small bag. "I saw the story," she said, her eyes kind. "No one should go home to that." She drove me to the hotel that had been donated. The manager himself gave me the key card. "Stay as long as you need," he said. The room was warm and the bed was comfortable. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt safe. The weeks that followed were strange. The community really did show up. The plumbing company fixed my furnace. A restoration company cleaned the house. I started going to a support group for veterans, and I met other women who understood. I started physical therapy at the VA. My therapist, Mike, was tough, but he was good. "You're not broken," he told me. "You're just adapting." My family's contact was minimal. A "thinking of you" card from my mom. A short voicemail from Mark complaining that his boss had asked him about the news story. No one ever apologized. I stopped waiting for them to. With the help of my new support network, I started a small fund for female veterans returning to the area to help with emergency expenses, like a ride from the airport or groceries for an empty fridge. At our first meeting, in a small VFW hall, I stood up in front of a room full of people who had helped me. "Family isn't always blood," I said, but family is who shows up. 6 months later, I was back in my house. It was safe and it was warm. I was in the backyard gardening. David, my late husband, had always loved my tomatoes. As I picked the first ripe one, I felt a sense of peace. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was a text from my support group. I scrolled past a new, unread message from my brother. I didn't need to read it. My revenge wasn't about yelling or fighting. It was about building a life that was full and good, surrounded by people who cared. It was about setting boundaries. It was about being finally okay.